You're really good. It's so nice to connect with you again, Anthony.
100%. I just realized it's been just under 4 years. We last spoke and it was right in the middle of the pandemic.
Yes, during those lockdown days.
Correct, correct. And you've
Very
had
nice
a
to be with you again and to reconnect, Anthony.
Yeah, 100%. And I really enjoyed our conversation on the Health Up podcast. And hence why I'm keen to have you on the Joyful Mate podcast so that you can really enlighten the listeners and viewers on how to discover more joy, happiness, and fulfillment in their lives. But before we get into doing that, I would love you to share your backstory as to how you've arrived at what you're doing today.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, it's by need, really. I think with any of us in this world and in this space, it's like our own personal journey of like lack of joy and lack of wellness that led us to like seek really deep and seek solutions that are long lasting and effective. That eventually, when we're on the other side, we're so passionate and so reverent of the process and the transformation and the modalities that we want to share that with the world. And that was my story as well. I suffered from three burnouts. And for anybody who has either experienced burnout or knows someone who has, like you'll know and understand that burnout isn't just about fatigue. I mean, although that's the most obvious manifestation of it, and it's that type of like fatigue and exhaustion that nothing can clear, even if you sleep 14 hours a day. It's like that bone dead, tired feeling, but that always coexists with other dysregulation, like with your sleep, with your mood, with anxiety, with depression, because really burnout is a nervous system state that is in collapse, that is in shutdown. So after suffering a series of these episodes and not really being willing to receive the conventional modalities for recovery, which at the time were only, and still really, like the only thing on offer was antidepressants and talk therapy. I thought this is not for me. Even though I knew nothing about the mind body connection, even though I knew nothing about the nervous system, even though I knew nothing about the subconscious mind, I knew intuitively and innately that there must be another way to live well, healthily, and happily that didn't rely on medication, talking about your issues and your problems indefinitely, and that didn't involve side effects and high costs. But I didn't know what that was. So I embarked on an inquiry, and that's what it was about 16 years ago when I had my first burnout. And my inquiry was, what does it take to live happy, healthy, and well? And because when we're living happy, healthy, and well, then we're not in a state of burnout. We're not in a state of depression. We're not in a state of anxiety. We're not in a state of sleeplessness. We're not in a state of dissociation and dislike with ourselves. The All those resources of joy and well-being are abundantly available to us and bioavailable to us. But of course, I didn't know that back then. And so my journey was very much a journey of inquiry, study, application of those strategies on my own journey, and then delving deeper into various certifications and trainings. And eventually, when all of the symptoms cleared, and there was a whole bunch of symptoms, I coded everything that worked and put it into a very concise, step by step, evidence based blueprint that takes people from massive overwhelm to a place of feeling like themselves again. And that, because I didn't know what I was doing back then. I didn't have any guidance, I didn't have any mentorship, I didn't have any support, I didn't have any accountability. It took 16 years. But now that I know what I'm doing, and the system has been replicated, hundreds of times now over the years, my promise is that this can happen for you in 3 months or less, because it doesn't take long for the system to repattern and rewire, because the system is wired to help us thrive and flourish. Yes, the number one mandate of our mind and our nervous system is survival, but it also is wired for us to thrive and to flourish. But it can't thrive and flourish if it is in a state of overwhelm and a state of overload.
It's yeah, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation because it's something that like you cannot experience joy, happiness, and fulfillment in as you said, in a state of stress, just simply because you can imagine running away from that tiger. You're not going to feel happy, joy, or fulfilled in trying to get away from a tiger. So How do
And
people
in
know?
that moment, that's
Yeah.
not what matters.
Yeah.
In that moment, the only thing that matters is survival. And even though nowadays our stressors have evolved, and thankfully they've evolved beyond like the immediate survival needs, the internal kind of like software, if you will, like our nervous system responses have not evolved to detect the difference between an imaginary threat and a real threat. So whether it is like running away from actual physical danger or in emotional stress, like a perception when we look at our inbox or we look at our to-do list, or we have a really uncomfortable conversation or a really bad run-in with a boss, a colleague, or a loved one, the internal biology of stress is the same, Anthony. It's the same biology of stress like our ancestors experienced, when they were running away from a tiger. And the thing is, in stress isn't problematic. Stress, other than it being a survival mechanism, it actually opens us up to a lot of really enhancing life experiences. The new science of stress now reveals that stress in the absence of in the absence of perception of danger and threat can actually enhance productivity and performance and energy and and meaning and connection. But it's when the stress goes on for prolonged periods of time without down regulating, without resetting, and those stress hormones remain lodged in our tissues and our organs and in our body, eventually the system runs out of fuel. And when it runs out of fuel, it goes into that shutdown state, that collapse state, where the only thing that matters in that moment for the nervous system is the survival of the physical body, which means prioritizing your breathing and the beating of your heart and deprioritizing everything. Of course, including joy, and also including sleep, including immunity, including digestion, including reproduction. And that's why, in moments of high stress and periods of high stress and lives of high stress, we see all of these very commonplace syndromes that we see nowadays in our modern world, issues with IBS and insomnia and infertility. And if you think about it, like the body knows how to sleep, the body knows how to digest our food, the body knows how to have, regular reproductive cycles and how to have babies. But the problem is because it's so overwhelmed, its only preoccupation is the survival of your physical body. Those things have absolutely no bioavailability for us to experience them in our lived day-to-day life.
Yeah. So, how would someone recognize that they're in this state of chronic stress? So, it's really starting to, before it has that real flattening effect or that, that real burnout effect. So, how could they tell that they're on that spiral down towards burnout? What's some of the signs, symptoms, and things they should look out for?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Anthony, because you see the mind is always speaking to us through the body, right? And so the mind or the nervous system or the subconscious mind or the brain, whatever label you want to refer to it, like that internal mechanism that knows what's best for us and that is wired to help us thrive and survive. Because it wants us to thrive, not just survive, it will always, always speak to us to get us back on track. And because the way it speaks to us, the way it signals to us isn't through like conscious language, like language that we can understand with our conscious mind, it sends like signals, right? And those signals are signals of sensations, dysregularity, issues with problematic behavior, with compulsive behavior, with addictions, issues with dysregulation with sleep, dysregulation with what we talked about, like digestive issues and reproductive cycles. But also more subtly, and I actually have a checklist if you and or your listeners would be interested in it. It has 15 signals, that body signals that signal that your body is in that place, your nervous system is in that place of collapse and shutdown. And some of those signals are pretty obvious, like what we talked about, issues with sleep or digestion or regularity with reproductive cycles. But it's also, are your hands cold and clammy? It's also, is your voice lack tonality? Is your voice monotone? Because the vagus nerve runs through our vocal cords, right? And so, a lot of times, if you think about it, when we are in moments of high stress or high distress or high pressure, one of the ways that we signal to the world and to ourselves that we're uncomfortable is our voice starts breaking, our voice starts quivering, our voice gets stuck, and that's because of the channel of the vagus nerve and where and how it runs. Also, any time that we have any type of consistent aches and pains, that is a signal that the nervous system is running out of fuel. And I'm not talking about the aches and pains that come after, a sports injury or after a fall. I'm talking about like pains and aches that never go away, headaches that never go away. I mean, migraines. That's a very, very, very typical symptom of a nervous system in dysregulation. If you're getting a lot of colds and you're not recovering from your colds and your colds linger for a lot longer, that's also a symptom of dysregulation. It means that your immunity is off. If you find yourself in constant people pleasing tendencies, if you find yourself in patterns where you are chronically comparing yourself to other people and feeling that there's lack and limitation in your life, that's also a signal that your nervous system is in that collapsed state. And also the S word, and the S word that I'm talking about is suicidation. So suicidation is when we're having thoughts of ending things because there's absolutely no joy left in our lives. And until I actually really learned the correlation between, and like really understood the correlation between nervous system dysregulation and how that affects our psychosocial behaviors and our psychosocial relationships, I actually was terrified of using the S word, right? But because of my own experiences, what I now know from studies and also the experiences of my clients, I know that when the system has run out of fuel and when there's nothing left, life doesn't feel worth living. I mean, I've been there many times, and a lot of my clients have. And I'm not talking about attempting suicide. That's not what I'm talking about. That's a very, very different experience. I'm talking about having the thoughts of ending it. And suicidation, the pronunciation, suicidation not only comes from not having any joy left or any meaning left or not seeing any purpose or being totally directionless, but one of the experts that I follow and that my work is based on is Dr. Gabor Mate, and he said it best. He said that when we suppress emotions, any emotions, particularly like the negative emotions, because somehow we've been hypnotized into believing that it's wrong or weak to show anger or sadness or shame or guilt. And so when we suppress them, we deny them, we push them away, we pretend that they're not there. What we're also doing is we're suppressing emotions of joy, the other positive emotions there as well, the emotions of joy and meaning and gratitude and kindness and patience. All of those get suppressed as well because it's the same. It's the same spectrum and myriad of human emotions, right? We're everything. We're not just parts. The parts that we like and then the parts that we dislike, we tend to disregard. So when that nervous system is in that place where maybe we're contemplating, what is the point, or what am I here for? One of the biggest indicators of that is huge suppression of self, huge suppression of emotion. And as we work to integrate those emotions, right? Because that is the process. It's integrating the emotions, right? Coming back to fullness, coming back to wholeness, coming back to healing. The other emotions of joy and fulfillment and purpose, they very immediately and automatically and spontaneously come to the surface because remember where we started this conversation, that the nervous system and the mind are actually wired for our thriving and for our flourishing. So the nervous system totally knows how to do joy. It knows how to do purpose. It knows how to do fulfillment, just like it knows how to do sleep and immunity and reproduction, right? And so when you remove the overwhelm, when you remove the inner turmoil, when you remove the internal chaos, then there's space. There's space for all the other stuff that gives your life meaning, joy, and purpose.
Yes, no doubt the listeners and viewers are probably thinking, okay, I've got a clear understanding that, I'm under prolonged stress and chronic stress and experiencing some of these feelings and physical ailments. Now, how do they break this cycle of being stuck?
Yeah. So it starts by intention, right? And it starts by commitment, and it starts by taking responsibility for where you are and where you want to go. And I know, like I'll get into the actual steps in a moment, but I think before the steps can actually take hold and take effect in your life, until and unless you say, look, I am responsible for the change, and there's nobody else responsible for the change. It's not my boss, it's not my work, it's not my to-do list, it's not the demands in my life, it's not the pressures in my life, it's not. Yes, all of those are contributors, and as you change the internal story and the internal responses, your perception of those stressors will change, but ultimately it's not those that are going to make the difference. So it's really important to start from a place of, I'm 100% accountable and responsible for the change in my life. And something magical happens when we take responsibility for change, Anthony. Other than it's a precursor for actually creating transformation, when we take responsibility for change, we also take ownership of the result. So that when the result happens, notice my choice of language, when, because there's no reason why, when there is intention, given the willingness and the wiring of the system to give you more of what you want, when you get those results, once you've taken that ownership, nobody can take those results away from you. So it no longer becomes, oh, the joy is because of the job, or the fulfillment is because of, the relationship, or it's like the changes and the improvements are yours and yours alone, because you have allowed those changes to happen, and you've taken actual steps to make those happen. So I know that sounds really trite and really obvious, but that is a really important starting point. And then there are three simple but very powerful and important steps in order to get unstuck, or in order to overcome the overwhelm. And once you overcome the overwhelm, you also clear out all of those other symptoms of dysregulation that we've been talking about, because all of those are symptoms of a nervous system in overwhelm. And so the three steps are supporting the nervous system, overcoming the inner turmoil, and eliminating chronic stress. And let's just delve into those a little bit more, so that your listeners have more of an idea of what we're talking about and what are some things that they can start thinking about right away. So when we're talking about supporting the nervous system, I mean, that is absolutely foundational. I mentioned earlier that I had three burnouts, and it was in learning through each of my burnouts that now I'm completely symptom free, and have been for 10 years. And it took me 16 years because I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know how to sequence the order of those steps and those modalities, all of which are very effective and very, very powerful. And it wasn't until my third burnout that I learned about the importance of the nervous system, and particularly around the importance of creating like a felt sense of safety. And Anthony, I know that had I learned about this in my first burnout 16 years ago, I would not have had two more burnouts. Because really, dysregulation happens when there's a perception of lack of safety, right? And as we said a moment ago, safety at a nervous system level is not like, oh, I've got an alarm system or a lock on my door. It's the perception of lack of danger. And in today's world, that danger, I mean, for many of us in the modern West, that danger isn't like a physical threat, but it's more that perception of threat, that perception of stress that comes from, looking at our inbox, getting caught in traffic, doing the juggling act, having run-ins with annoying people, so on and so forth, and then not resetting after a series of those. And so creating that felt sense of safety, I know had I felt safe internally, and had my nervous system been regulated and come to regulation early in my journey, I would not have had two more burnouts. So, starting with supporting your nervous system, like creating that felt sense of safety, not knowing you're safe in your mind and using affirmations, that does not work because your nervous system is very primal. Your nervous system is about like your body, right? The survival of your physical body. So, the way you communicate it with it is very body based. So, it's through sensations, it's through physical feelings, and that is actually the foundational step, is creating a felt sense of safety for your nervous system and anchoring the nervous system to a felt sense of safety so that it starts receiving the body message that it's safe. Once it receives the body message that it's safe, then it starts to regulate, then there's no reason for it to remain stuck because now it knows, oh, okay, Anthony is okay. I can do more than just prioritize the beating of his heart and the pumping of the breathing of the lungs and the pumping of the heart. And now I can attend to all the other aspects and facets of Anthony. So, part of supporting the nervous system is creating a felt sense of safety. It's also working on down regulating, right? Like really, because the system knows how to come back from high stress, high pressure, high demand. So if we look back to our ancestral days, when the stress response would have been triggered, when we were running away from a saber-toothed tiger. Well, eventually, once the threat disappeared, right, then the our ancestors would have come back to homeostasis, right? Now, because the stress is constant and the pressures are constant, that biology of stress is constant. So, learning about how to come back down from that and incorporating it into your day daily, regularly, and consistently is crucial, not just for overcoming, but also for preventing. And thankfully, because again, our nervous system is wired to help us survive and thrive and flourish. You don't need like hours in a day or like lengthy practices in order to do these things. Like these are, once you learn them, you can incorporate them into your days, like little micro breaks and little micro hacks that keep communicating to your nervous system. Okay, everything is okay. I can down regulate. I can take a breath. Anthony is safe. I can now attend to other aspects and facets, desires, dreams, and goals of Anthony's. So those are some of the things that we work on when we're working on supporting the nervous system. And that is where we start. And it is foundational that we start there before we move anywhere else. And a lot of times, just when you start there, just when you give the nervous system what it needs in order to understand safety, a lot of the other stuff starts to actually fall into place. Because again, our brains and our nervous systems have tremendous capacity for processing and consolidating our memories, our emotions, and our life experiences. Just like animals in the wild have this tremendous capacity to overcome trauma and attacks on their lives, which is like the ultimate trauma, is an attack, a physical attack on your survival. Well, we have a more complex nervous system that is completely wired to do the same thing, that helps us also to recover and come back from trauma. So we're wired, our systems are wired to actually overcome and process these overwhelming emotions, overwhelming life events, overwhelming life experiences. And a lot of times you don't need to take directed action in order to overcome the inner turmoil. That once you start supporting the nervous system, that works itself out. But sometimes, and especially if you've been carrying the traumas for a long time, you need more, what's the word I'm looking for, like more targeted, more directed and focused intervention to clear the inner turmoil. And that cannot be done by talking about it, and that can't be done even just by being aware of, oh, I know what the issues are, because the system doesn't work that way. Anthony, I think, I don't know if we spoke about that during our first conversation, but maybe, well, your listeners here wouldn't have listened to our first conversation. I was born into the war in the Middle East, in Lebanon, in the 1970s. And as you know, that war in Lebanon like it lasted for over 15 years, and it claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, and it displaced millions and millions of people. Well, our family was like we were one of the lucky ones in that we left pretty early on, and we had quite a nomadic upbringing. We lived across several countries, and all those countries that we lived in were very safe countries. We were in Cyprus, in Greece, so European countries. Eventually, we immigrated to Canada, and then I did my studies in the United States. So we were living in places of safety, freedom, security, and prosperity. But once my life started falling apart and all of these chronic issues were really taking the joy and the fulfillment and purpose hostage in my life, and I started digging, for understanding and solutions into what was really going on. Because consciously I started reading about trauma, and like war being, well, one of the most obvious traumas. I mean, you think about like a war, that violation of your boundary of safety, a violation of like your security and your survival. I completely disregarded that with my conscious mind as that having any type of direct or indirect correlation into the issues that I was having, because in my conscious mind I was so identified with the story and the belief that we were lucky because we left early, we were unharmed by the war. But the deeper I delved into these modalities, and the deeper I delved into my healing journey and understanding what was it really that was creating the dysregulation, one of the first things that came up when I was doing work on clearing the inner turmoil was, that day that we fled the war zone, and the bombs were flying overhead, and there was so much fear and chaos in the car. And my mom was, I was 5 at the time, my brother was 3, my little sister was 1, and my father was caught outside the country because, leading up to our escape, he had been kidnapped 3 times. And the last time that he was kidnapped, he was held in captivity for 34 days with 36 other people, and every day they were assassinating somebody, in front of him. So there was all of that fear and that chaos leading up to us leaving, and being one of the lucky ones that was trapped into the nervous system. And because consciously I knew that we were so lucky, and that's what I had heard throughout my life, the system never recovered. There was never that stress arousal cycle was not completed. So that 5-year-old that experienced so much survival stress and trauma, that was never shut off, and that biology of stress kept playing and replaying and replaying for years and decades, until eventually the system ran out of fuel. And so what I'm trying to get at here when we're talking about overcoming the inner turmoil, it's not just knowing about it with your conscious mind. Like I knew, yes, okay, I left, the war could have impacted where I was, but it's actually resolving it at a subconscious level. Because yes, the adult, the 40-year-old knew that that was part of the story, but the 5-year-old still believed that she was in that car in fleeing the war zone, replaying the same feelings and the same beliefs and the same fear. So it's really important to shut that off at a very subconscious level, not at a conscious level. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about overcoming the inner turmoil, and doing it at the level of mind at which these overwhelm and this fear is created and stored. Super, super important. And then the last part of the piece is eliminating chronic stress. And I can't stress enough, no pun intended, I can't stress enough how important that is. And part of that is we need to dehypnotize ourselves from that belief system and that conditioning that we've all bought into, that stress is harmful and stress is a killer. I mean, yes, it's chronic stress that is the killer, but stress is not harmful. It's not a killer. Stress is a source of fuel. Stress is a source of energy. Stress is a source of connection. Stress is a source of, performance. But as we were saying earlier, when it coincides with a felt sense of safety and when we're changing our perception towards it, so, stress, we need to manage stress. Part of managing it is learning about the new science of stress and embracing it. And then what we need to do is to eliminate the chronic stress, that type of stress that we were talking about, that remains stuck and lodged inside our tissues and inside our emotions. That's what needs to be eliminated if we want to overcome the overwhelm and if we want to get unstuck. So, those three steps, once again, are supporting the nervous system, overcoming the inner turmoil, and eliminating chronic stress. And it does not need to take a lifetime or 16 years the way it did for me. As I said, now I do it with my clients for 3 months or less. And actually, that is the promise, or you get your money back. And, we have now been doing this for 8 years across 4 continents in 16 countries with hundreds of clients. And it inspires me and causes me more and more reverence each and every time I see clients and students going through the transformation. It just renews and refuels my reverence and my belief in this part of us that really knows how to make us thrive, not just survive.
And how can the listeners best connect with you if they're in that state of not wanting to burn out, but they realize that they're sort of not coping and they're a bit stuck. So how can they best connect with you?
Yeah, Anthony, through email faye@faylawand.com. Also on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, it's just my name, Faye Lawand. And my website is currently under renewal. You're also welcome to go through my website, but email and/or those social media channels are the best way to go.
Fantastic. And to the listeners and viewers, I'll include those links in the show notes so you can go directly to the show notes and connect with Faye. So I just wanted to say, Faye, thank you so much for sharing such great insights in terms of how to recognize chronic stress and that people may be experiencing signs, symptoms of potential burnout, and then the steps on how to navigate your way out of it. So I really appreciate the thoroughness and the detail that you went into in explaining this subject, stress, without demonizing it and saying it's all bad. So you obviously put it into context to say that there's unhelpful stresses, but there's also forms of stresses that can help really serve us and help us deliver good into the world. So I really appreciate you sharing your time and wisdom.
Such a pleasure, Anthony, and thank you so much for all that you do to spread the message about joy and fulfillment and purpose in the world. Always a
Uh,
pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. It's so great to reconnect. And to the listeners and viewers, please share it with others that you believe that could benefit. So anyone that you know that's a bit stuck and feeling really low in energy and struggling to move forward, please share this episode with them so that they can get insights as to how they can get out of that feeling of stuckness and chronic stress. So thank you once again, Faye, and thank you, listeners and viewers. Excellent. So, yeah, you're mostly uploaded. You've 70, I think.